we're not advocating people do drugs. We're saying if people do drugs, they should be able to know precisely what they're putting into their bodies so they don't kill themselves.
I'm Colin Burrows, and this is the Woodstein Media Podcast, Episode 3. This podcast is adapted from interviews conducted for articles on Woodstein.ca, and it is produced on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, and Odawa peoples. This episode features an interview conducted with Eris Nyx, co-founder of the Drug User Liberation Front, aka DULF. This interview was conducted for an article that was going to deal with overdoses in the music industry, but ended up being part of a 3-part series focusing on harm reduction. DULF has been involved with other Vancouver area drug user organizations to distribute unadulterated drugs to users to stop deaths due to overdose in one of the areas that has been hardest hit during a years-long declared public health emergency in British Columbia. This podcast and Woodstein Media are independently produced journalism that you can support through Patreon or by donating through PayPal at woodstein.ca. That's WOOD-STEIN.ca. Thanks for your interest and support. If you enjoy this podcast, you can support it by listening to more episodes and liking, sharing, subscribing, or reviewing them.
Okay, well, I guess let me give you a ton of background here. So I'm one of the co-founders at DULF, myself and Jeremy Calicum. DULF's like a public policy change kind of advocacy organization that's moving more into praxis these days because the government isn't doing anything. I also have like a huge background in the arts sector. So I'm the president of the Black Lab Art Society, which is like a venue right next to the Ovaltine at Main and Hastings in Vancouver. And I've done a bunch of work with the community to put out LPs, like compilation LPs of street musicians in the neighborhood.
This isn't what I thought he meant. We said the fields of flower, but I guess your life fitting at a writing to the voice raised and the message taped, and whatever way we push it now, screw me. See the conversations, religious maze, and I hate your face when you lie, when you lie, when you lie. Oh, the stupid race, it's a human state. Got it underway, laughing, pushing the steel into the sky. Galaxies before, landed before we've cried. Watch you die, watch you stand in line while they use your life. To the voice raised and the message take, and whatever way we push it now, it's gonna make. You see the altered states, religious maze, and gotta hate your face. You lie when you lie, when you lie. Oh, the stupid race, it's a human state. This isn't what I thought you meant when you called it a golden city. But I guess you know the pricing better than writing. To the boys praise and the message take, and whatever way we push it now, it's gonna make. You see the colored states, religious maze, I gotta hate your face.
That was Human State by Tangent Quo off 100 Block Rock 2. Available from incidentalpress.bandcamp.com. Be sure to check out the lyrics when you're there, because the music on the compilation represents the people of Vancouver's downtown east side, and they sum up their lives better than most of us journalists attempting to tell their stories can.
Largely because I can't support myself off art because I'm not a very good artist. I've worked in harm reduction because I have a background and an experience and a relationship with the community. You're not in Vancouver, are you? Or you
No,
are?
I'm in Ontario.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you know about the overdose crisis specifically in BC, but BC is the hardest hit province and the only province with a publicly declared public health emergency. So ostensibly, what's happened in BC is the opiate supply has gradually been replaced with stronger and stronger synthetic opiates. So fentanyl, carfentanil, blah, blah, blah. And I guess because of COVID, we get this balloon effect where because fentanyl becomes harder to import, people start using benzodiazepine. So you see fentanyl and atizolame come into the drugs, like people walking around naked, no idea where they are, missing all their stuff. If you're shooting benzos, like, Xanax, I guess would be like a conventional example, you just go into this like blackout state. It's really bad. And I personally lived right down the street from, Main and Hastings. So I'm responding to an overdose once, a day. It's really brutal. And then, I do drugs. I've done drugs my entire life since I was 13. I have no intention of stopping doing drugs. I guess I'm more like a motorhead. I take speed all day to work a lot. I work 20-hour days, and then I take downers to sleep. And then I crash. Eventually I'll be I'm going crazy. I need more sleep, and then sleep for 4 days. So, I think from my perspective, just public education about drugs is really lacking. People are drugs are bad, but I'm alcohol's the most dangerous drug of all, both for society. If you look at any kind of peer-reviewed journal or academic paper, it's alcohol is the worst one, but it's regulated. And, the government taxes it for healthcare, Why? Because when we impose prohibition, organized crime increased, enormously in power. The toxicity of the alcohol supply skyrocketed. And, the alcohol became more potent because it was easier to smuggle. I think this drive towards the strongest synthetic opiate, it's whatever is ready to hand, people will use. It's like huffing gasoline. I'm if you can get fentanyl on the corner, you'll get fentanyl. If you can get alcohol, if you can get whatever, but it's whatever is right there, whatever your friends in your community are using, you'll use. And to bring this all back to the context of music and overdoses, what we're really seeing, most musicians, I know very few musicians who are quite stable who are doing fentanyl. Most musicians are doing things like Xanax, cocaine, party drugs, which aren't that contaminated with opiates really, but crack cocaine, and methamphetamine especially, because they're frequently sold by dealers in conjunction with fentanyl, low-level street, dealer mix-ups happen, or people get pressed pills, they go buy Xanax and it's just fentanyl pressed in a pill, and that kills them, right? So, and I've had a lot of friends who are musicians die. And I guess, eventually I've worked for the government. I've been blacklisted by the government. Now I'm unblacklisted in this hilarious twist of fate because I've been right the whole time. I used to work for the British Columbia Center for Disease Control as their peer operations coordinator or whatever the fuck my position was. And they were paying me to advise on drug policy, blah, 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 public health crisis. And I was just your prohibitionist framework is killing everyone we know, and you guys can fix it, and you're not doing anything. You're basically murderers. And they dismiss me for being abusive towards the other staff, right? So anyway, so then, you try and do everything the illicit route, and you're if we have drugs where people know precisely what they're putting into their bodies, their risk of overdose death is nullified. we're not advocating people do drugs. We're saying if people do drugs, they should be able to know precisely what they're putting into their bodies so they don't kill themselves. And so DULF historically has done this kind of episodic compassion club thing where we give out drugs for free to local drug user groups who screen the people that receive the drugs. So over the age of 18, already using illicit drugs, I'm like, this is killing one person a day in Vancouver, sometimes more. And we're over 10,000 people have died in British Columbia since the beginning of the crisis. And those are it's like reduced the life expectancy, and the majority of people who are dying are like in my age group, like 30 to 59, I guess. And so we're now being like, I guess we have to start scaling out a model where we're providing people with their supply of drugs, which, from the perspective of money, I'm like, even to support our initial pilot that we're going to try to run in July, I'm like, we can only support 12 people because we're trafficking $250,000 of illegal narcotics per annum to support them with no government protection, right? Strangely, though, the Municipal Health Authority, and all this information is on DULF's website, www.dulf.ca. The Municipal Health Authority, the Municipal Police Force, City Hall, like all these people, the First Nations Health Authority, blah, blah, blah. It's like the Canadian federal government is like, fuck you. And everyone in Vancouver who's like close to this crisis is like, yeah, you guys are cool, like you're doing it. But it's like a monumental, like I'm an artist, man. I didn't want to be involved in public policy. Like the reason I started working in the shelter system to begin with was I was like, this pays really well and I can work like 2 shifts a week and live in this like, 8 foot by 8 foot room for $300 a month and just do whatever I want. Like I don't have to work. And now I'm working like 80 hours a week trying to sue the Canadian federal government because, from our perspective, it's the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. It's a way, drug policy legislation works that's causing this kind of genocidal catastrophe for people who use drugs. Sorry, I know that was a mouthful, but there's a lot of moving pieces in what's going on, unfortunately. I wish it was just like straightforward, like now everyone stops dying because I'm like every week somebody I know dies. I'm like down here, it's like a fucking killing field. They're like mopping the floor with people.
Monsters stuck in your head. Monsters under your bed. We are monsters. Oh, we are monsters. Oh.
I am addiction. You could catch me in the kitchen. You could catch me at the store. Maybe catch me on the corner of the Great White North. Valley, Phoenix, Arizona, El Mexico, across the globe. Maybe in your head, maybe in your nose. I am something that you shoot, something that you smoke, someone that you knew. I am someone that you know, someone in your crew, someone in your home. Truth be told, I'm everywhere I get around, yo. Once I grab a hold, I ain't never letting go. Don't stop till you're broke, won't stop till you're cold. I will break you down till your soul corrodes. Come walk with me, it's a long, lonely road. I'm the reason no one you know is picking up the phone. Cause you thought you knew, thought you know, thought you could control my appetite. Don't I have a venomous bite? I know, I'll make you sick to your stomach, right?
Monsters stuck in your head. Monsters under your bed. We are monsters. Oh, we are monsters. Oh.
I'll meet you at a party, meet some gin with Bacardi. You got them girls acting naughty, damn, look at that body. Now from this place, your progression begun. You better recognize, son, yeah, it starts when you're young. And at first you're like, fuck yeah, shit, this is fun. Then depression it comes, just so I take it and run. But for now, just relax, enjoy yourself. Look at what I got here, dog, real top shelf. This the kind of shit that make you feel like your face melt. Take a little hit of this, man, yeah, it do you real well. Now I got you like a spell, and I'm taking you to hell. Hold on tight, what I told you, better watch that third rail. What you thought this was a joke, some kind of fucking folk tale? Don't trail, oh yeah, you caught up in the dope now. Now everyone wanna help, but they don't know what it is. Your parents, your kids, man, and only your friends. See, it's not just what you did, now it's how you live. And your people stop to give, so you take. In the distance it creates, it's like a whirlwind earthquake. Your world shifts and shakes, your body breaks, your heart aches. Yeah, you're coming with me, I'ma take you to a place so dark, so cold. I own your soul. I spit bricks laced with the sickest addictions, twisted dirty tricks, bloody fingertips afflicted. Got you picking up syringes and fixing them and sticking them in your bitch. Dope sick, pin slipping, broken veins you can't hit, so you miss. Now she's bitching and flipping and getting pissed. Can you feel the friction? Tension is building up in your head. Start to tripping, yelling and poking them holes in yourself. Dripping blood on the floor, man. What the hell you gotta?
Monster stuck in your head. Monsters under your bed. We are monsters. Oh, we are monsters. Oh.
That was I Am Addiction by Disguise off of 100 Block Rock 2, available from incidentalpress.bandcamp.com. It's illegal what you're doing right now, right? Like
Incredibly, yes.
yeah. So just knowing that,
I don't care. I sent the federal government a signed, affidavit that says I'm trafficking drugs. I'm doing the right thing. I'm like, if my friends are doing drugs, I want them to know what they're taking. You know, we're not making, that's the thing. We're not making any money. We're not criminals. I'm like, we buy drugs. We buy like an ounce of cocaine, test it for purity rigorously using like 5 types of testing: immunoassay, FTIR, mass spectrometry, nuclear magnetic resonancy, 4 types. And then once we've done all that and are like 99.9% sure we know what the drugs are, we box them in boxes that you can tell if they've been opened, label them, and then sell them at cost, you know. And we also have a program where hey, don't jump out the window, crazy cat. We also have a program where we crowdsource money. So all of this is like crowdsourced. Like we don't have any government funding for the drugs, obviously, because, you know, it's illegal. But I'm like, you know, the causal chain of like who's at fault here. It's like, are the people giving us money? Because everything's very explicit and above board. We're like, we take your money, we go on the dark web, we use cryptocurrency, we buy drugs, we get the drugs, we test the drugs, and then we redistribute them without making any profit. And no one we've given out like 310 grams of drugs or something, and no one has ever overdosed off our drugs, ever. 0, fatally or non-fatally. So I'm like, I think like a lot of the problem is the impurity and the toxicity of the drugs, and people just not understand. There's no public education. There's no labeling. Imagine this. Imagine walking into a liquor store and every bottle was blank and opaque, and some bottles had methanol, and some cans had methanol, and some cans had vodka, and some vodka bottles had, you know, beer in them. And then you just have to drink it, right? I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it is a market, and it's a market people are going to access, and it needs to be regulated. And at the end of the day, that's what DULF is saying. I'm a crappy artist. I want to go in my corner and make my crappy art. I don't want to be involved in bureaucratic, Kafka-esque public policy, you know. But I will be if I have to be, because I'm watching everyone I know die. And a lot of artists, you know, and you know, I think trauma breeds great art, and trauma also is a fountainhead of a lot of chaotic drug use, right? You can use heroin in a functional way your entire life. I'm like, is that fun? No. Is being a fucking alcoholic fun? No. I'm like, right? I'm like, it doesn't matter what the drug is. If your relation to it is problematic, it's going to be problematic. I'm like, you can do heroin once in a while. And it's an immature kind of Ronald Reagan, Ronald McDonald, Ninja Turtles, you know, 1980s war on drugs opinion that like one hit and you're hooked. I do all the drugs we give out personally before we give them out to be like, yep, that's that. But I'm like, it's about moderation and not overdoing it, not being a fucking idiot, right? It's like when you watch children drink and they're just slamming back liquor and you're like, oh man, you're going to be pissing your pants in the corner of the venue in, 10 minutes from now.
Okay. You mentioned how it works. Crowdsource money, buy from the dark web, make sure it's clean, you distribute it. But on the education side, what do you do?
You mean around the folks taking the drugs?
Yeah,
So we only distribute to people we know, basically.
Okay.
So the network, we operate through drug user groups, which I guess there's a lot of this that I feel like is very BC centric, and a lot of it is very Vancouver centric. So I'm trying my best to explain this huge archipelago of shit because it's really confusing. But in Vancouver, there are by and for drug user groups, and what I mean is they're nonprofits that drug users run. Their board of directors are all people who use drugs. Their membership is all people who use drugs. They have membership screening to make sure people are using drugs, when they join. And the ones we work with are the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, VANDU, which is probably the biggest and the one most people know. The Coalition of Peers Dismantling the Drug War Society, Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society, and British Columbia Association of People on Opiate Maintenance. So these are, I know the membership. The community down here is very close knit, and even if there are like 10,000 injection drug users, I guarantee you I know half of them by name, right? So it's not like we're going outside of school and giving away the drugs. So it's like a very communitarian, because there's meetings and there's protocol and people are talking and there's data and there's follow-up and there's research. So the education component really comes in with that community building and bringing people together and talking about stuff, and talking about people's experiences using the drugs, right? I think a lot of this is uncharted territory because the vast majority of research in addictions medicine is kind of focused on treatment and recovery and abstinence, and like the vast majority of people who use drugs use them unproblematically, just like the vast majority of people who drink don't have drinking problems. So I think that the narrative around drug use is it's all messed up. But the other thing I can say is, like, if on a broader level of education, I'm like, our rhetoric around drugs is like, don't use drugs, or if you're going to use drugs, don't use alone, but not like, how much drugs can you take before you overdose? Like, what are limits of how long can you do heroin before you get dope sick? Because these are all like actual pragmatic pieces of information. Or if your friend overdoses because you're at a high school party, how do you administer naloxone? What are the steps to administering naloxone?
So right now, it's like we're preaching or teaching an abstinence-only education curriculum. But you're saying instead of doing that, there should be drug ed, like sex ed or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think with alcohol, with anything, they do it with cigarettes too. And I'm like, if you look at the rate of smoking, cigarettes are still legal, but I'm like, what they've done with public education around cigarettes is greatly reduced, the amount of cigarette consumption, right? So I'm like, it's a social framework of your society that makes people do drugs or not do drugs, and a lot of it comes with like poverty and trauma. I'm also like, drugs are fucking awesome, man. Like, personally, I'm like, I love cocaine. I wish it wasn't such a conflict resource and a problematic thing, but I'm like, I wish oil wasn't a problematic thing either. I'm like, there are things you consume, food, clothing, it's all fucked up. And I'm like, yes, we should regulate these industries better, but I'm like, the thing isn't to be like, oh, cocaine's bad, so don't do it. I'm like, it's fucking awesome. And that's just my personal opinion on the drug. And I'm like, different strokes for different folks. Some people like smoking weed. Some people are like, this makes me a paranoid, neurotic mess, I'm just like, whatever, you enjoy doing that helps you live an authentic and healthy life. I feel like if I didn't do drugs, I'd go so crazy living in this fucking hellscape dystopia. I'd, be shooting cops or something. I'd be in prison forever, right? And there's so much stigma. And I think a lot of musicians that die are, you know, it's like, oh, they were hiding their drug. We didn't know. Not in every case. I'm not like Lil Peep or something, but I'm like, a lot of my friends who are musicians who passed away from opiate use, you know, didn't want to talk about it. And it was a very like shameful and stigmatized thing in the community, you know, because I'm like more involved in the punk scene than anything else, but I'm like very like shameful. Like everyone's doing coke in the bathroom, but like someone's doing heroin and everyone fucking loses their mind. And I'm just like, all the drugs are the same. It's just your relationship with the drugs that becomes a problem. And other people's attitudes towards you doing drugs. Because I'm like, if everyone's like drugs are bad around you, you're not going to want to talk to anyone if you do have a problem.
Yeah, definitely. So you were bringing it back there to music and the punk scene. Do you want to expand on that more so that I can write a focus on that and your involvement there and how that relates back to DULF?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship, DULF is a very aesthetic-oriented institution. You know, I'm like, it's a very protest movement kind of aesthetic-related thing. Like, we're like, here are the boxes. Like, look how good this looks. But I'm like, the background for that is like Virgil Abloh, like Off-White, like Public Image Limited, when they did that, like an album thing, like the jewel packaging, like, you know, like I feel like No Trend or some other band did some like similar shit where it was just like very generic packaging. I'm like, the aesthetic origins of DULF, or even having our logo so simple. I can't remember if it was Black Flag or Crass, but someone was like, you got to do something people can just spray paint everywhere. You know, something that just like DULF is easy to write. It's not like some long confusing acronym no one can remember. You know, and just having the fire thing, which I didn't personally design, Jeremy's partner actually did, but I'm like, it's a very, you know, punk oriented aesthetic. In terms of music, I guess I play in this band Dust Blaster, and our lyrical content and I guess stage presence and general media presence is very controversial.
That song was Ian, Mr. Mistopheles, Mackay by Dust Blaster off the album Free Drugs for All, available at dustblaster.bandcamp.com.
There's a lot of rhetoric about the legalization of drugs, you know, and we, it's not something people really want to talk about in music, though. I feel like, you know, Griselda, there are some like hip hop groups, East Coast hip hop groups Benny the Butcher, West Side Gun, Conway the Machine, that are like talking about drugs in a real way. But it's also from the perspective of being like a drug dealer, and there are people that do kind of like warning songs like that, don't do drugs, but no one's like really examining the issue. I also, though, collaborate with this band Crack Cloud, and their whole kind of shtick is like, we were fucked up people, and then we stopped using drugs, and now we're in like recovery, and this band's like a recovery project. But I think some of their commentary around, drug use and people's relationships with drugs and people's relationship with each other on and off drugs, as much as people are like, oh, this band's so problematic, I collaborate with them because they have something intelligent to say. And I think that's just something I find lacking in music generally these days. I'm like, everyone's just, going on stage and jerking off. Like, I don't really have time for it. And especially in punk, I keep showing up. I run a venue, so I can get into all the shows for free, but I keep just showing up and being like, I hate this, I'm leaving. I'm just like, go up there and like bare your heart and like say something. But I'm like, if you're just there to have a fashion show, I'm not really interested, right? Life's too short for that. And that's something I've discovered from watching so many people die. I'm like, Jesus Christ, life's short, And as a drug user, I'm like, it only takes one time to fuck up to die. Just once. You just have to fuck up once. And I'm like, I'm really safe, obviously, because I'm doing all the safe drug shit. But I'm like, people offer me drugs at parties, and I'm just like, yeah, sure, why not? Whatever, It's not a good situation.
My cross is the fix within the prick. Boss like so and I can make it stick. Trace back to a time unsubsidized, where loving meant living without disguise. Young blood called commerce led astray. Black market is viral in our day. Politician target savage streets. Discreet use of the cyber police. Fill a gap for the generation with the latest entertainment sensation. Your Godbox has autonomy, the main program that keeps you free.
That was Time Unsubsidized by Crack Cloud off their self-titled debut from 2016. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Eris Nyx for the interview and all the great work she does to help save lives. Check the description wherever you are listening to this for links to more information, or visit Wood-stein.ca. That's WOODstein.ca. You can support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Colin Burrows. Like, share, comment, follow, and support Woodstein Media and this podcast, and have a wonderful day.